says live, but wait a minute.
There it is.
Now it's live. Oh,
there we go.
Well, we're starting again. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Awakened Soul with Aaron Scotty and Lucas Mack. And today we're so excited. Thanks, brother Aaron, for pointing that out.
I didn't want to interrupt you. It was so beautiful, but I was like, usually something pops up.
Good point. Good point. Everyone just tuning in. I was talking for a while there, but we weren't live, but now we are. And we're excited to bring the very beautiful and powerful Mitzi Perdue on our show today. So Mitzi, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, well, it's a joy to be with you, and especially because I love what you're about.
Thank you. So, and again, thanks to Mark and Crystal Hansen for introducing us. And I asked before we started, that's a very powerful association, what you and them connected with. And so tell us your journey and how, I mean, you've come from a very unique background, very powerful perspective now and stance in the awakening process. So yeah, just share with us your journey for those who have yet to hear your story.
All right. My story is, I was really lucky. I grew up in a warm, loving household of considerable success. My father and my uncle and my father's roommate from college co-founded the Sheraton Hotel Corporation. My father started with no employees, and at the time of his death, he employed 20,000 people, and the family owned 400 hotels. That's the Sheraton story.
Wow.
But that's not quite the end of what my background is.
Yeah, sure.
I also had the supreme good fortune of marrying the love of my life, the chicken man, Frank Perdue. And Frank had an extraordinarily similar story to my father's, which is he also started with no employees. And at the time of his death, he employed 20,000 people. So if I were writing a novel and describing my life, I'm not sure I'd believe it, but there we are.
Wow. Growing up, what was the hotel? Where was it as far as brand and properties when you were growing up?
All right. My father founded, or he co-founded, the chain at the height of the Great Depression around 1933. And I didn't occur until about, I was born in 1941. So the hotels, they were growing rapidly by the time that I came on this earth.
Amazing. Did you get a chance to travel to all the different properties and see that? Was travel part of your growing up?
Yeah, there was no chance of visiting all 400, but I did get to see a great many of them. And guess what? I saw privilege on a scale that's probably hard to imagine because we never stayed in less than the presidential suites. Wow. And my father used to say that he would like nothing better than to arrive and have the manager say, "Oh, you can't stay in the presidential suite. We sold it." But I ended up in a lot of presidential suites.
But you got to see a lot. That's giving you a very unique perspective now with where you are and the stance for human trafficking. What did you learn observing all that growing up?
Well, my father, in spite of spectacular success, I mean, he knew all the presidents and had stories with them and would have dinner with them. I mean, it was, I just learned from my sister that, for example, Prime Minister Anthony Eden was a pretty regular guest at Father's table. Wow. So, I mean, he did know the rich and famous. However, things that he said that guided me in my life include that the greatest pleasure his wealth ever gave him was in giving it away. Is that not cool?
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And the other thing is, I think he was a very early example of servant leadership. And if I may, I'd love to share an example.
Please, yeah, share away. We love it.
Well, guess what? I wasn't expecting to know.
Okay, good. Well,
we practiced it beforehand just to make sure we didn't get any wrong answers.
That's right.
Well, okay, here's a story. As a child growing up, I was, it was as clear as anything in the world could be to me that my father was an extraordinary success. And so I was forever asking him, "Daddy, how did you do it?" And, he gave lots of answers that sort of zeroed in on it, but on his success. But one of them, which was easy for me to understand, and therefore I'm eager to share with it, with everybody. He said whenever he'd take over a hotel, and the hotels were growing during the time of the Great Depression when everybody else was running away from real estate. I mean, hotels were known as a fast one-way ticket to bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So how could he make a go of all these hotels that were, when he took them over, they were ones that were on their way to bankruptcy. So how'd he do it? And here's what he told me. He said whenever he'd take over a hotel, he knew ahead of time that every employee there was just totally demoralized, because when there's a new owner, it would just be typical for the new owner to go fire people and hire their own friends and bring in, his own trusted people. Well, Father didn't take that approach. He told me that the day he took possession, he'd invite every member of the hotel, and there might be like 400 employees, there could be 800, and he'd invite them all into the ballroom. And he knew that, they're all worried about getting fired. So their pain was so great that they probably weren't going to be able to listen to a word he said until he addressed it. So the first words out of his mouth in every case were, I want every one of you to keep your job. I want you to stay in your job because I know that you know your job better than anybody else in the world. And we each have our role. My role is to give you the resources and the support to show the world just how good you are. And in return, you'll see that in a matter of months, this hotel is going to be financially stable. It's not only going to be stable, it's going to be the most popular in the city. And we are going to be an example to everybody else in the city that tough as times are, things can turn around. Cool?
That is
That's
so
beautiful.
But that's not the end.
No, I don't think it is. I'm curious how is he able to navigate? I mean, you hear about a corporate structure, and you have to do some things as far as our understanding to get to that level of success, right? You have Wall Street to deal with, you have financial backing, and all these people to answer to. How did he navigate that and still lead with his heart?
I think, well, let's get back. I said that it began in 1933, but let's go back to the year, let's go back 10 years. And this is going to answer your question about leading with his heart. And I'm not even sure you could say the whole thing is leading with his heart, but here's this story. When he was 26 years old, he could never stick with anything. And my grandmother even told my mother, his future bride, don't marry Ernest because he can never stick with anything. You'll end up poor. Wow. Well, so that got him interested in going to a career guidance counselor to find out, what's wrong? Why can't I make anything of myself? And after 8 hours of testing, Johnson O'Connor told Father, in my career, I've never seen somebody with worse human relation skills. He said, Mr. Henderson, you're clearly a bright enough fellow, so that's not what's holding you back. But since you don't have any human relation skills, I recommend that you have a life as a scientist in a laboratory where you can make inventions and not deal with people. Wow. Well, Father took that as a challenge, and he spent the rest of his life learning everything he could about what motivates people, what makes them tick, just everything that he could about psychology. And he took courses. He learned public speaking. He learned salesmanship. He became probably, I think I can even say certainly better than any of his competition in understanding people. And I think it's that led him to, when he'd first stand up in front of new employees and say, I want you to keep your job, it's because he understood and put himself in the way of understanding how people were feeling. So I'm not sure how much I can say that was leading with his heart or leading with his understanding, but how about a good combination of both?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, because a lot of times there's a bottom line to me. So how is he able to do that? Because if some employees just weren't cutting it, but he still had that understanding with him, right?
I think he had an almost magic ability to to create employee engagement where, I mean, he was famous for people would stay with him for life. They loved him. Uh, and I want to add another part to this story about what happened, when he first took possession. When he first took possession of a hotel, he told me, he said the right words, but that's not enough. He said he would demonstrate that he really meant it, how important the people were to him, because the next day, the employees would see just cavalcades of like decorators and plumbers and drywall workers or whoever, and they'd come in to refurbish the hotel, because a hotel that's been about to go bankrupt, it's kind of gone to seed. But the employees would see that these people coming in to refurbish the hotel, they never went to where the paying public would see. Nope. They would go to refurbish and spruce up, like the employee dining room, showers, kitchens, just the places that the public would never see. So of course I asked my father why, and he said, people have a compulsion to live up to or down to your expectations. And this was a way of just showing them that he believed in them.
That's beautiful and powerful. People, like water, will go to the lowest denominator, and so if you set that higher, that's where people will aspire to be. That's beautiful.
Yeah, he said that his goal was to give people a better vision of themselves, and that people have this compulsion to live up to it. But his goal was for the woman who's like making beds, or the bartender, or whoever. They're not just making beds or tending bar. No, they're building as a team the best hotel in the city. And he did that like 400 times.
Amazing.
Wow.
As you traveled to these different hotels, obviously you got to stay in the property itself and enjoy what that accommodated. But what did you learn about humanity on a broader scale as you travel to different cities or culture or people, cadence, time, food? Like what did you observe as someone who grew up getting to see the world in a way that many have not?
Well, father was always very concerned that would live in a total bubble. And so I did get to experience, I think, as high as, well, pretty much as high as you could get in America.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe if you're a king in some other country, but I mean, I did get to see life at the top, and I got to meet people at the top. Like I can remember one day in the presidential suite of some hotel we were in, President Eisenhower came calling.
Wow.
And because the hotel chain began in Boston, when Senator Kennedy was senator, he'd always stay in Sheraton hotels, kind of loyalty to a Boston company. But then when he became president, same thing. He would always stay in Sheraton hotels, and I can't say they hung out with each other, but they sure as heck helped each other. So yeah, I got to see terrific things. But to kind of compensate for that, father did something that I think is somewhat rare, and I would recommend it to anybody who has a child growing up in privilege. He made sure that all of his 5 children went to public schools. And we went to private schools and public schools, but it was just the best experience in the world for me to hang out with a girl whose father was a dairy farmer, or a kid whose father was a policeman. And we certainly had chores. I bet I've mucked out more barns than most people. And when I met Frank Perdue, the chicken guy, one of the things that we could kind of laugh over is both of us had the same chore when we were like toddlers, and that was picking up the eggs. You reach under the breast of the hen and you reach out and you take her eggs. And so both of us collected eggs as very young people.
Amazing.
So I thought it was really great. Oh, and then another thing, because they didn't want us to have rich man's disease, where you're just entitled and think the world owes you a living. I can remember it wasn't until 12 that I had the first item that wasn't a hand-me-down piece of clothing. I was the fifth child, and I can remember just so vividly at 12 years old, my mother gave me some brand new leather gloves for winter. And they were just the most amazing thing to me, because that was the first time I had been given something that wasn't a hand-me-down.
That's amazing.
Wow.
That's amazing.
It's good.
And then we would get continuous lectures about how a successful life isn't about spending, it's about service.
Yeah, that servant leadership is such a beautiful, it's the model. It's the model. I've said I owned a company for many years in a small business, but what I would tell my employees is that servant leadership is love and affirmation in practice. Everyone is craving to be loved and affirmed. And servant leadership is saying, I see you, I acknowledge you. Now let's correct a little bit. Let's move here and go this way, as opposed to the blunt force trauma that most leaders bring to individuals and tell them no and stop and do. That servant leadership model is such a beautiful environment to create and lead from.
All right. Well, in the case of my father, no employees, 20,000 at the time of his death, and a reputation that if you started working with him, you worked with him forever.
Wow.
I think that he elicited that because I never heard him like dress down an employee. I think his motto was inspire, don't require. And back to a leader's job is to give people a better vision of themselves.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, if you want people to go the extra mile, it's a two-way street. You go the extra mile for them.
Right. You have to show them what they're capable of, because a lot of people just milk them till they're dry, and just crack a whip. And that just doesn't really, there's no longevity in that.
Right.
It's a means to an end, and there's no heart. So it's interesting that he had that level of success. It's no accident, right?
I would say it's no accident because, well, let me give you another example of heart paid off spectacularly, and I recommend it to anybody. I mentioned that as a kid, I was forever asking him, how did you do it? And, there isn't one answer, but of the many answers, one that I particularly cherish, he said that one of the reasons that Sheraton grew so fast, and he was the president as well as the co-founder, he said in negotiations, when you're buying a hotel, he said it was extremely important to him not to have a reputation of being a shark. And a shark means you're the person who, in the negotiation, you go after every last penny. He said no. He said it was extraordinarily worthwhile to leave something on the table, to not go after the last penny. In fact, he said that if a negotiation, both sides weren't enthusiastic about it, it wasn't a good deal. And so I said, well, how does that work? It sounds really idealistic, but how did that keep you in business? And he said that because he had a reputation of being generous when he was buying a property and not going after not squeezing out the last penny, not being a shark, he said the extraordinary payoff was that whenever, say there's an elderly couple who has 1 or 2 or 10 hotels, and let's say the husband is running the hotel or the chain, and he goes to his great reward. The widow's left, and maybe she's in her 70s or 80s, and she doesn't want to run it. She wants to put it up for sale. She goes to her lawyer and says, what do I do? And the lawyer, assuming he's an honest, caring lawyer, is going to say, sell it to Sheraton because they're going to treat you better than anybody else will. So Father said he got the pick of the best hotels because the best, he would always get the first chance to buy a good property.
Wow.
So isn't that just, I mean, the insight that it took to get that?
Yeah.
But I do think that he did it out of being a good person. I don't think that, I mean, he was aware that there were benefits, but I don't think that he did it because of the benefits.
Yeah.
For you, and I want to hear about Win This Fight and how you've taken your life experience and now you're putting all your passion, or it seems to putting a lot of passion. I can't speak for all, I don't know.
Well,
But
how about all?
oh, okay, I like that. Put all your passion into this important movement. Walk us through the journey for people that are still, I think, waking up to this atrocity. What was your journey of learning and awakening to it? Because this is where I think when we share the story, I know when I first awoke to it, Aaron, we've connected about this. Some people I think are feeling like, what, this is happening and I didn't know it's happening. And if I don't know, maybe I don't even observe and I'm too late. But I think when we share our stories, like, oh, how I learned, it's beautiful. So yeah, I just curious, like how you got into it. If you could share, like, because Win This Fight, we have to win it.
We
Yeah,
have to win
there's
it.
something about, I mean, you in the position that you were in, you didn't really have to get involved.
Right.
So we know the how based on the stories you've told us thus far, how your father brought you up in a certain way. So we know that you were always unlocked and you were always tapped in. But what was that moment that you said, I have to get involved in human trafficking of all things?
Okay, up until we're really a couple of years ago. I mean, we're almost on the second anniversary of when I realized that my life was going to take a turn.
Mm.
And that is, like all of us, I'd heard the term human trafficking, but I had no idea what it really meant. But this lecture I heard, it was a guy, his name was Paul Hutchinson, and he was telling a group of maybe 100 business owners, he was saying that, you know, his mission in life was to rescue sex trafficked children.
Mm.
But he showed pictures of like little girls, maybe 12 years old, who had been raped 10, 20 times a night, 365 days a year. And their life expectancy was less than 7 years because they were, on average, going to be dead before 7 years from overdose, suicide, disease, or murder for their organs. And I thought, in my whole life, I just never heard anything more absolutely horrible. And, you know, of course, I'm a grandmother. I think of grandchildren and the amount of suffering, not only for the children who are sex trafficked, but how about their parents? I mean, just the agony of, it seemed to me the worst scourge on earth. And I'm going to go in a dark place, but I'm going to come right out of it. I'm telling you as
We
our
can
conversation
handle it.
that we're going to go in a dark place, but then we're
Yeah,
going
yeah.
to come out to a radiant place.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, if they do know about human trafficking, want to turn away because it is so dark. I mean, I sincerely believe that it's the worst scourge in the face of the earth, and it's extraordinarily widespread. According to the United Nations, there are 40 million people who are trafficked. Now, some of them are labor trafficked or debt bondage trafficked or child bride trafficked. But I mean, I feel that once I saw the faces of the little girls who had the most miserable life possible, I couldn't unsee it. And so I wanted to do something about it. And I actually made a little vow to myself that that's how I would spend the years that remained to me.
Mm.
Okay, that's the dark place, the bright place. There are things that can be done about it. And, well, I would love to invite anybody who's listening to us to, if they have a smartphone handy, text WIN to 55312, and you'll get to hear, this is upcoming, but on May 11th, there's a free webinar at 60 minutes, and I get to moderate it, but it's on wonderful, new, exciting things that can really disrupt the traffickers. And it has to do with, do you remember Al Capone and one of the nastier thugs that existed, and they could never get him for all the murders he had committed. They got him for tax evasion.
Right. Right.
Well, a new approach to human trafficking, and this is the bright spot that I'm just so excited about. Some of the larger anti-trafficking organizations are switching around to going after the finances of the traffickers. And the hope is that that can put a great big crimp in what they're doing, because they're doing it for money. And if you can find their bank accounts and seize them
Right.
and make it less profitable, it's fabulous.
That's powerful.
Yeah. And also, if you think about at the root why this is happening, because this is the biggest kept secret, I think, on the planet. And it's not even secret, it's out there. People are choosing to ignore it because it's so atrocious. And we understand that. But if you think of what is happening, these are the brightest lights, the most beautiful souls on the planet, right? Is a child that comes into the world, is a bundle of joy to bring. They are depressing the light, which is what we are trying to shine. This is why we're gathering together. This is why we're telling these stories. This is why we're doing the Awakened Soul. This is why we're coming together and shining light on the darkness. Even though people don't want to see it, it's time now. Ignorance is no longer an option because this affects everyone, whether you ignore it or not.
Right.
These are light beings coming into the earth to be here and shine their light, a bundle of joy. And it's up to us to just become aware, shine the light of awareness, and there is no more darkness. But people are so afraid to admit that this might be possible, and it's time to stop. You see what's going on, you see what's going on in the world, in your family. It's because people are living in ignorance, and it's time to change that now. So I honor you for
Thank you.
being in the position you're in, using the resources that you have. You didn't have to do this, but you did, because I believe at a deeper level, you know how important this is.
Well, the temptation to look away from something so ugly is tremendous. I get that. Who wants to even face that human beings can be so evil? That's that's deeply upsetting to me to know some of the evil that I've looked on. On the other hand, some of the best people I've ever met on the planet are the people who are combating this. And the amount of selflessness and dedication that I've gotten to see, it's just so uplifting. And Win This Fight, which is the organization that I head, our purpose is to raise awareness and also to raise funds for other organizations. And that means that I've been exposed so far to at least 100 other anti-trafficking organizations working on raising funds for them, working on telling their stories. And if there's anybody who would like to volunteer for this, I'd sure love to have them. And here's my promise. It's the ride of your life. You'll find it exciting. You'll get to use abilities you didn't even know you had. And you'll get the feeling that you've contributed to making the world a better place. So come join me.
Yeah, you're providing purpose. There's purpose behind this.
Mitzi, have you seen the new I forget what it's called, the new movie with Jim Caviezel about Tim Ballard's life? Have you heard of that?
Is it
or something like that? Or
is it out yet? Because I want to see it. I know Tim Ballard.
I don't think it's out yet, but I hear that's going to be a really powerful opening to this conversation on a broader scale on that mainstream Hollywood movie, which will be powerful. So I'm excited. I was curious if you had seen it yet or
Well, I'll tell you my connection with it. I once had an appointment, well, quite recently, maybe within the last few months, I had an appointment to talk with him. And here we are charting away. And I write for Psychology Today, and I write articles and blogs about the different anti-trafficking organizations. Well, Tim Ballard, here I am chatting with him. He said, "Oh, I lost track of the time. I need to be on set." And I don't know if he was in Hollywood or wherever, but wherever they were filming, he had taken his coffee break to talk with me, and then he was back filming it.
Wow.
Yeah, the movie's called Sound of Freedom, and hopefully it's
Sound of Freedom. Yep.
But I don't know how, it's interesting to see how it's being handled distribution wise and marketed. I don't know. It might be one of those independent grassroots things that just need to be talked about.
Yeah.
Well, I have such faith in Tim Ballard because, oh, I mean, first of all, he's a good guy, but second, he has a way with words. He's if anybody can publicize it and get it on the radar, it's him. But on the other hand, since I care about it, I'll do everything I can to publicize it. I've got a quick look on when it's coming out.
Wow, that's great. So I want to transition real quick because I think we'd be remiss without even talking about Frank and your husband, and how did he get the name the Chicken Guy, and share his journey. I think that's a fun story.
Well, let's see how he got started or how we met, or
actually both. I'd love to hear how he got started and then how you guys met.
All right. His father had been he grew up on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. His father had been in the Railway Express, but in 1920, which is the year Frank was born, his father, known as Mr. Arthur, noticed that all the really wealthy people that he would come across in the Railway Express were farmers. So he decided he wanted to be a farmer. And the kind of farming that appealed to him was chickens. Well, Frank didn't expect to spend his life on the farm. He actually went to college. But by his second year in college, he realized, I don't really like academia. So I don't want to say he was a dropout, but he didn't continue. And he went back to work for his father until he could figure out what he wanted to do in life. And what he really wanted to do was to be a professional baseball player. And he had a couple of disadvantages, which is he couldn't hit and he couldn't catch.
Just a couple.
Minor setback. Yeah, that's right.
So while he was waiting to figure out what he wanted to do in life, he never quit and ended up, when he started with his father, no employees. And yeah, the same story as my father at the time of his death, 20,000. And how we met? We met at a party in Washington. I was living in California and I was a rice farmer. Wow. And sometimes people don't hear me clearly, but rice, the kind of thing that you'd eat with chopsticks if you were in Japan, rice.
Yeah, rice, wow.
Okay, so we met at this party and I had to leave early and he arrived late, so we only overlapped by 10 minutes. But we decided that chicken and rice go well together.
That's right. That's right. Now, because I live in Seattle, I just want to clarify, is it Washington, D.C. or Washington State?
Oh, I should have made that clear. Yeah, Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Because Purdue headquarters is in the neighboring area of Maryland.
Wow. That's great.
And it was super because we actually decided to marry that night.
Wow.
How did that happen? So wait, you had 10 minutes and it was a done deal.
Well, I need to be more accurate because it wasn't 10 minutes. It was the first 5 minutes were spent talking about how never either of us would ever remarry because we'd had unhappy previous marriages and would never trust anybody again. And marriage was just a whole terrible institution. But then somewhere around 5 minutes, we started talking about how, we'd really like to remarry, but we would never trust anybody again. And then he looked down at me and he said, I believe I could trust you. And I looked up at him and I said, I believe I could trust you. And then we spend the next 5 minutes describing what our marriage would be like. It would be supportive and not competitive, and would be there for the good times and the bad times. And then I left.
So in hindsight, you were right, which means there's something to be said about the soul's intuition.
Well, I came back to see him a few weeks later, coming from California back to Maryland, and he gave me my engagement ring within 5 hours of knowing him. And when we went to see the minister who married us, our church has a 6 weeks prenuptial counseling period, and we wanted to start the clock ticking. So the third time I see this man in my life in the rectory of Reverend Drazel's church, Reverend Drazel says, remember, this is the third time I've ever seen him. Reverend Drazel says, I'm so happy for you. This is so wonderful. How long have you known each other? And I say, do you mean in person? He said, well, yes. And so, I'm looking at my watch and I say 36 hours.
That's awesome.
And then when we married, we had known each other in person 6 weeks and 3 days.
Mm.
And okay, can I ask? I mean, I know I'm a guest and this isn't my role to do, but let me do it anyway. What do you make of that? Where you just know?
I think that's beautiful. That's what I mean. I mean, if your soul, if your heart and your intuition tells you something, you lean into it and you just kind of see how the universe fills in the cracks. That's been my more recent experience. More and more and more, I'm learning to trust my intuition because
to me, it was almost inexplicable that two people who had, how about substantial fortunes and had every reason to be wary,
right.
would make up our minds so quickly. And I could see that, maybe I'm a nutcase and I could make up my mind, or possibly he'd be a nutcase and he could make up his mind, but that both of us knew. It was the universe
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I asked. I mean, in hindsight, now you look back, it seems like you guys were right? Because you lived a happy marriage together, and
well, we were married,
served the world together. Maybe that's why you came together, because you were meant to do that. Because not everyone in your position is looking for a life of service, right?
He was as much into a life of service as my father.
Mm.
And I'd love to boast and tell about something that I did when we first married.
Yes, please.
Okay, we had just gotten back from our honeymoon, and as I mentioned, we hadn't known each other a long time. And I proposed something to him that I think, initially he felt, what planet did you come from? Or maybe what galaxy did you come from? I told him, Frank, I think we should entertain every single person who works for Perdue Farms in our home. And he said, there's 16,000 people. That's completely unrealistic. And I pretended that I hadn't really processed that he had said no. And I said, I think we could have them 100 at a time. No, that's way too many. I bet we could get it put together in 6 weeks. No, that's way too soon. And we went round and round with me pretending that I wasn't understanding that he was. But as we went round and round, I noticed that, his emphatic no was sort of changing to maybe. And then finally, I like it. And the reason that he liked it was one more way for him to tell the people who he worked with how important they were to him. Because when you have somebody in your home for dinner, even if it's 100 at a time, still it's dinner at the big boss's house. Yeah. And he literally would wait on the people who worked with him. There was a great big long buffet table in our living room, and he would stand behind it with some other people who were also serving, but he would serve his employees. I mean, it was literally servant leadership. And then at the end of the evening, he'd thank everybody. I mean, he'd stand up and he'd give them, a real up-to-date, assessment of how the company was doing, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then he'd answer questions. And at the end, every one of these dinner parties, and we did this for 17 years, he would have some version of, I know the company wouldn't be what it is today without each of you. Thank you.
Wow. It's amazing. Is Perdue Farms, I don't know, is Perdue Farms still going, or the chickens, does it still exist?
Not only does it still exist, it's still a family company. Wow. And we're the largest producer of organic chicken in the world.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Here's why you don't know it. And I'm going to give you some statistics that are out of date by at least a year. But I know, because I was at a processing plant and got to see it, that there, at least a year ago, we supported 258 different brands, like the house brands, like Trader Joe's, Whole Foods. Yeah. If you buy organic chicken, it will have their label on it.
Yeah.
but it's produced by us to their specifications.
That's so
In
smart.
fact, unless you're buying from a local farmer's market, if you're buying organic chicken anywhere, it's ours because we pretty much, I mean, at this moment, we don't have competition
Wow.
because the barriers to entry are just extraordinary. It took us 10 to 12 years to learn how to do it.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Farming is the most basic human skill. I mean, the fact that you guys are have that and are able to produce that is such a beautiful service to humanity.
I feel it is. And the organic part, you would think that anybody could just go organic tomorrow,
Mm.
and actually they could. But if they do it on any scale, the chickens all die. So what we had to learn was, extreme biosecurity, probiotics, adjusting the diet, adjusting, just 100 things.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. So while we're wrapping, I would just love for you to share when this fight, how people, I know you mentioned it before, but just want to make sure that we really reiterate the organization and what you're doing and how people can connect with you.
Well, what I would love for people to do is go to winthisfight.org. And that is winthisfight.org. And there's a way of remembering it, which is the initials are WTF. And by the way, that's not an accident. The person who chose our name is a neuroscientist. And he said it really helps for memory to have something sort of offbeat or wrong. And he says it's very incongruous. I mean, this is him speaking to me. He says it's really incongruous for you, Mitzi, to be saying WTF. Because he's telling me this. Your image is something ladylike, and people can assume you don't know what it means. But in any case, remember, win this fight by its initials. Come to it, and there's a place where you can sign up for my blog, which I would love for you to do, because I will. When you read my blog, people tell me that it's upbeat, that it tells things that you can do. It tells what other good people are doing. You will always walk away feeling not so bad about humanity. And then if you want to contact me, there's a contact Mitzi part of it, and I'll answer any emails that I get.
That's great. Mitzi, we are so thankful you came on, and thank you for sharing these beautiful stories and your beautiful soul with the world and with us today. Thank you.
It was pure joy. I love being with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, dear friends, thank you for watching Aaron and I, The Awakened Soul, and Mitzi Perdue, and we will talk to you on the next episode.